You know someone like this. Maybe you have worked with them. Maybe you grew up near them. Maybe you are related to them. Someone who does things that would keep you up at night and then sleeps perfectly well. Someone who hurts people and moves on without a trace of remorse. Someone who, when confronted, looks at you with genuine confusion, as if the concept of guilt is a language they were never taught. And part of you wonders, is something wrong with them? Or is something wrong with you for feeling everything so deeply? The answer is more complicated than you might think. And it starts not with psychology, but with biology. Guilt is not a simple emotion. It is not just feeling bad about something you did. At its core, guilt is a social emotion. It exists to regulate behavior inside a group. When you feel guilty, your brain is doing something very specific. It is running a comparison between what you did and what the group expects you to do. And when those two things do not match, guilt is the signal, the alarm that says something is out of alignment and needs to be repaired. This is why guilt feels uncomfortable in a way that is different from other kinds of discomfort. It is not just pain, it is a directive. It points you towards something. Apologize. Make it right. Repair the relationship. Fix the gap between who you are and who your group needs you to be. And for most people, that system works. Not perfectly, not without distortion, but it works. The guilt fires, the behavior adjusts, the social bond repairs, and the group stays intact. But for some people, that system does not fire the same way. This is not a character flaw they chose. This is not simply selfishness or laziness or moral failure. The research points to something deeper. The part of the brain most associated with guilt and empathy and the anticipation of social consequences is called the anterior cingulate cortex. In people who consistently show very low levels of guilt or remorse, this region shows measurably different patterns of activity. The alarm is quieter, sometimes it barely sounds at all, and beneath that, there is the amygdala, the brain's threat detection center, the part that fires when you imagine the pain you might cause someone else. When it sees someone else suffering, it reacts. It produces discomfort. It generates the internal cost of hurting someone, and that internal cost is a major reason most people do not hurt others freely. In people who show very low empathy and very low guilt, amygdala responses to the suffering of others are significantly reduced. The internal cost of harm is lower. The brake is weaker. Now here is where it gets important. This does not mean these people feel nothing. It does not mean they are emotionless. Many of them feel fear, desire, frustration, excitement, ambition, pleasure, love in their own way. What is different is the specific circuitry that connects their behavior to its social consequences. The part that asks, what will this cost the people around me, and does it matter? That question runs differently in them, or sometimes barely runs at all. Researchers have found this pattern across a spectrum. At the far end of that spectrum sits what clinicians call psychopathy, a cluster of traits that includes shallow emotional range, reduced empathy, low anxiety, and most strikingly, an almost complete absence of guilt following harm to others. Studies suggest this cluster appears in roughly 1 to 4% of the general population, higher in certain environments, higher in certain professions, but present everywhere. Further along the spectrum, in less extreme forms, are people who simply have a higher threshold for guilt. They feel it, but they feel it less easily, less intensely, and they move through it faster. They compartmentalize. They rationalize. They tell themselves a story about what happened that removes their responsibility from the center of it, and they sleep fine. What both groups share is that their internal experience of social consequences is genuinely different from yours. When you do something that hurts someone, your brain constructs a kind of internal simulation of their experience. You feel a shadow of what they feel, and that shadow is uncomfortable enough to modify your behavior. Their shadow is lighter, or absent. And here is the part that is hard to sit with. This means that when they hurt someone and move on, they are not suppressing guilt. They are not secretly suffering. They are not lying awake processing what they did. The guilt is not there to suppress. The system that was supposed to generate it either runs at a much lower volume or does not run at all. This can make interactions with people like this profoundly disorienting. Because you bring your full social and emotional toolkit to the relationship, you interpret their behavior through your own internal experience. You assume that they feel what you would feel if you had done what they did. And they do not. And that gap between what you project onto them and what they actually experience is where so much confusion and pain lives. So what do you do with this? The first thing is to stop trying to trigger guilt in someone whose guilt system runs differently from yours. Explaining how they hurt you in more and more detail, hoping that at some point the information will land and produce remorse, usually does not work the way you hope. Not because they are not listening, but because the channel that information is supposed to travel through is narrower than yours, or missing entirely. The second thing is to recognize what this tells you about your own guilt, which is considerable. If you feel guilt easily, if you lie awake running through the ways you might have fallen short, if the idea of hurting someone fills you with genuine dread, that is not weakness. That is the social circuitry of a human brain running at full volume. That is the system working. The people who feel the most guilt are often the people who cause the least harm, because the system is doing its job. The alarm fires early and loudly and pushes behavior toward repair before serious damage is done. And the people who feel the least guilt are not necessarily the ones causing the most harm, though the correlation exists. They are simply operating with a quieter alarm, one that requires more to trigger, one that, in some cases, cannot be triggered at all. None of this excuses harm. None of it removes responsibility or justifies what is done. But it does change how you understand what you are dealing with. And understanding clearly is always the beginning of responding effectively. Tonight, if you find yourself replaying something you did, asking whether you should have said that, whether you handled it well, whether someone is okay, that discomfort is your social brain doing exactly what it is supposed to do. The system is working. And that, in the end, says something important about who you are. If this gave you something to think about, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next video. And if you've ever hit a massive goal only to feel surprisingly numb inside, you'll definitely want to check out our video, Why You Feel Empty, after getting everything you wanted. Click the video on your screen right now to dive in. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.